welcome again. Video number 71 finished the first series or stage in the process of bringing people to a state of knowledge concerning natural, or more appropriately, constitutional law, and preparing ourselves to get into a controlled orbit around that which nominally binds us. Concerning spaceflight, that binding influence is, of course, the Earth which we inhabit. Metaphorically, in terms of the concepts we're exploring, of the philosophy of human nature, individual rights, and the appropriate relationships between individuals and what is termed authority, that binding influence consists not of the physical mass of a planet, but the abstract body of what is called law. We'll return to this metaphor later. The very term law is problematic because there are two types of law. These are natural law and man-made law, the latter of which is called law incorrectly. Why is this latter label incorrect? It's because the two things are different in nature, so using the same name is at best misleading, indicating sloppy or inaccurate thinking, or at worst deliberately deceptive, indicating possible or likely malign intentions. The difference is defined thus. Natural law is, as the name implies, determined by the forces of nature or physics, and is immutable, meaning that it's beyond the control of mankind. Some call it God's law, but whether it's created by a deity or is simply an innate property of the universe is, for the point of this particular discussion, irrelevant. Whichever it is, it remains outside our control. Man-made law, conversely, is changeable and is more properly called legislation, a term derived from the Latin words legis and latum. Legis means law and latum means to make. So while both either possess or seek to possess binding effects, the difference becomes obvious when we understand the terms correctly, according to their original definitions. Since the existence of law of any kind is an integral part of our existence, it behoves us to gain at least a working knowledge of it. Firstly, to ensure that we don't cause damage to ourselves by inadvertently breaking any laws, but also that by gaining a more intricate understanding, we may find ways to relate our actions regarding law to our individual advantage. Returning to our metaphor about orbits, we see that by gaining an understanding of the relationship between gravity, velocity, and angular momentum, it is possible for us to escape the binding effects of the Earth's mass and enter into a relatively stable alternative state, that of orbiting the planet instead of remaining grounded. Regarding man-made law, the same principle applies. Those who gain a more intricate understanding of the existing legislation are able to use that to gain advantages over those who don't. The same applies, of course, in every field of human knowledge and endeavour. So the first series of videos provided at least a working knowledge of the emergence of a constitution based upon natural law, Magna Carta 1215, which by its very nature sits above any man-made legislation, which might seek to diminish or revoke any of the rights we each enjoy as our birthright. That series reveals that the mechanism for restoring those entitlements, if they are ever breached by those charged with serving us by protecting them, is simple and may be understood and implemented without the benefit of an expensive or mentally taxing education. This equates to the first stage of our space rocket, providing the impetus and momentum that we need to escape those things which seek to bind us and withhold us from achieving greater potential in our lives. When the fuel in stage 1 is exhausted, it drops away and stage 2 takes over. So what is stage 2? It's the stage which, having been given the impetus by stage 1, continues the process of propelling the craft, now unencumbered by the weight and drag of the empty component, along its trajectory towards the goal of a free-falling orbit and whatever tasks it has been designed to fulfill. It's necessary because to provide just one stage to get the craft into full orbit would require so much fuel that problems about the weight would work against the goal. So the purpose of this second series of videos is to provide further impetus towards propelling people towards the goal of freedom, or the type of momentum enjoyed when one is orbiting freely, unencumbered by the drag of unlawful legislation. During the period between video 71 and now, I released, with the help of some great like-minded friends, a presentation which expanded on earlier presentations by enlarging on the topic of principles. The quality of the reproduction left a bit to be desired, which will be rectified in future such events. However, the content contains valuable concepts aimed at helping people recognize some of the pitfalls and deceptions which have been installed over the centuries to blind folk to their real legitimate entitlements, many of which have been stolen or sidelined by legislative subterfuge. Anyone who desires to get copies of the slides used, hopefully to increase their awareness, or even better, to give their own presentations to spread this knowledge more rapidly, may inquire at the email address on these videos. It's to these principles we now turn in more detail. Whilst the numbers of people becoming alert to the unlawfulness of the corporate criminals posing as governments these days is increasing, it's lamentable that very few, as a percentage of the population, are taking any action relating to the invocation of Article 61 of Magna Carta 1215. The bottom line of the reasons why this might be has to be that people simply don't care enough about the loss of their freedoms or rights, or even those of their children and grandchildren, to be moved to action. Or if they are moved to action, those actions are not in accord with the law as it has been clearly laid down and explained. It's as if people are thinking, it's so simple, that can't be the answer, it must be more complicated than that. Yet the natural constitutional laws are simple. Understanding them is given to every person who has a functioning conscience and discerns from an early age that to enjoy harmonious relationships with others, we simply have to accord them the same respect for their natural rights as we do for our own. It's no great mystery. As Will Keyte points out so eloquently in his interview with Neil Oliver, it's as though the universe wants us to know these things and make use of them the same way we do with physical laws of nature. Why don't more people take up the cause? One answer is that there exists a group or class of people who don't respect the rights of others and have adopted the view that if people are stupid enough to have the wool pulled over their eyes, or so easily distracted that they simply don't care about issues like freedom and justice, then they deserve whatever fate befalls them. And there is obviously a deal of truth in that, even though it doesn't excuse the criminality involved. The irony is that those who can't be bothered to learn these things, or having learned them to take relevant action, are in fact complicit in their own destruction. The universe doesn't care about people's feelings. It just deals with the facts according to the laws that are in operation. There's a link to Will Keyte and Neil Oliver's interview in the comments, and I urge everyone to watch it and follow the links that Will provides, especially including the documentary about the jury in the US case. It is riveting viewing. There's no point in me restating all the points that are made in that interview, but I add this section by means of amplification. Here is a picture which recently appeared on social media featuring two prominent people with very large content in the public domain. A controversy immediately erupted as to whether this was a true image, something that had been photoshopped, or was a shot from years before, when Russell Brand was a known strident left-winger. My take on this event is as follows. There are many Trojan horses, it's true, but how can we tell that this isn't photoshopped? The truth is there's virtually no media that can be trusted, and in most cases it's irrelevant whether the posts are fake or not. What's important is the lesson we must take from this deplorable situation. That's why we each have to discern correct principles for guiding the morality of our behaviours. It's not something we can afford to outsource to anyone else, even those in our families. We can't control what others are doing, but we can stop lying to ourselves and focus correctly on the issues. What guidelines can we use? Begin with determining the natural laws which we all have to obey unless we want to suffer unpleasant, deleterious consequences. These laws exist in the physical realm, for example, gravity, angular momentum, moments of force, hygiene, toxicity of chemicals, etc., but also in the spiritual realm, honesty in relationships, the refusal to initiate violence, coercion, or manipulation against those who have done nothing to harm us. Breaking any of these laws leads to unintended consequences for the offenders, and these penalties apply even if we commit such offences by proxy. A prime example, deliberately ignored by almost everyone, would be voting in an election for candidates who have indicated that if they win, will enact legislation which violates some of those natural laws which uphold our inalienable rights. In doing this, we seek to impose our will upon those who may not agree with us, simply because we may end up in the majority. Both as individuals and as a society, we cannot expect to escape the consequences of such wanton breaches of natural law. Societies which embrace the tactic of voting for the majority to exercise unlawful dominion over the minority institutionalize coercion, ultimately backed by violence against dissenters, and condemn themselves to an ever-widening sphere of conflict. When that process reaches the point where a significant number feel that they can bear no more losses without responding violently, the structure of state crumbles and a new wave of power seekers rushes to fill the vacuum. All will seek to apportion the blame on those who didn't or wouldn't conform to their will, but the truth is that all who engage in the process are at fault for refusing to comply with natural law by not respecting the rights of others to hold differing views. The universe doesn't care about our feelings. The law is there. It's been revealed to all of us, and we either conform to it or suffer the consequences. If we seriously desire equality before the law, we must eventually accept an equal share of the burden of upholding the law. That means discovering of what the law actually consists, which for most people is something quite different from what they already think. and then taking action to comply with it, since almost everyone is not doing so at the moment. The principle is the same as going to a potluck dinner. If one wants to enjoy a meal the same as all the others, one must bring a meal to the table. There's no evading reality. This is the next stage of getting into orbit or freedom from drag. We must effectively disseminate true principles at every opportunity. Thank you for watching.